Hello, everyone. Nate, I appreciate the warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here. Y'all have heard about Welcome to Advertising. It's an amazing project. I'd be remiss not to mention my partners in that project. I've been working with Benny, Rachel, and Scarlett. We've been collaborating on that project for 2 years. It is going to be launching in February of 2023. So definitely stay tuned for that. But the only thing that's more exciting than that right now are the two amazing individuals that I'm sitting with here today, Ambika and Tasha. Both of these folks, we've had a lot of conversations prepping for this panel. I'm really stoked to be talking about it right now, especially as we're thinking about what the future of work can really look like, right? So our goal today is to kind of talk about not only well-being and belonging, but also just establish what a hybrid work environment really means in practice for a lot of people, right? So first, I would love to open up this conversation by, kind of asking both of you all, Ambika and Tasha, just what is your current environment right now? Right? How are you guys working every day? Are you waking up, or do you have a space carved out in your home? Are you back on the commute train? You're going back in the office? Give people a little bit of context about your work environment right now, and then we can get into the discussion more.
Yeah, so for me, and it's good to be here with the both of you. So thanks for having, and thanks to Allyship in Action. This is 3 years in, and I'm so glad to keep supporting and being a part of this community. But for me, it's both, right? It's hybrid. So I have different spaces in my house. Right now, I don't have a tenant in my two-family condo, so I actually use that empty apartment. Sometimes I use the basement, sometimes I use the living room, and then we're officially in the office 2 days a week. Most of the leaders are in 3 days a week, so then it's commuting to and from Manhattan. I live in Long Island, so it is commuter train back into the office. So it's a little bit of a mix for me.
Ambika, what about yourself?
Yeah, for me, it's also a bit of a mix. So this is my first full week coming back from maternity leave with my second.
Ah.
And if I have a cold, it's because I think every parent and every child is sick right now with something awful. So excuse my nose wiping and tea drinking. But I started off working at Mechanism's New York office in Tribeca. And then over COVID, I had 2 children. We moved to Chicago, and we have a much smaller presence here. So Mechanism is on a 2-day per week, Tuesdays and Thursdays in office. Every other day is remote. I think Tuesday is the stickler day where we truly want everyone to be together. This is when in-person meetings happen. This is when, everyone goes out to drinks with clients after work. And Thursday is a come as you are sort of day. If you want to come, great. If not, that's okay too. And we have seen people, move around a little bit. And so taking into account our employees' needs and what they need to kind of live their best life and do their best work while also sort of maintaining an agency culture has been the work of the era, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of great, amazing case studies about this time in work and this moment, because it is a big shift, right? We've gone kind of moving from that industrial time of like you had a set of hours or a set of days. So now it feels like it's all fluid, right? Like you could be working in a coffee shop, you could be in the office, you could be some of our offices have even invited clients to come and be with us in our space, just to help to ensure that they had working space,
right,
especially on projects that we're doing. So I think it's a time of change, but it's been interesting to see it evolve, for sure.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting because I think a lot of people are trying their best to extend a sense of grace. And kind of ease back into the process. It sounds like both of you all are in spaces where they're not, it's not super mandatory. It's a little flex, it's a little bit open-ended, but even in not having to go to the office, you still have to carve out that space in your home too, right? So like, even if the office was still 100% closed, you would still have to find a space and a way to work that works for you. Tasha, I heard a little bit about, you've got a secondary space in your crib, you've got an open, you got an escape. I might need
Can we come work from Tasha? I need a quiet space.
I'm also looking for a tenant. So if you know anybody that wants a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in Westbury, yeah, I mean, it has been, that is a big privilege, right? Like I have different components, areas in my house I can move around in. And I realized for a lot of people, a lot of staff, that was not the case. It still is not the case, that they didn't have that flexibility at home.
Yeah.
And so that really weighed in on how people were feeling physically, mentally, emotionally over this time. And so being part of the support group, and in the HR function, but in the work that I do around equity, inclusion, belonging, that has been a big component of how we're working differently, for sure.
Yeah. Space is it's a privilege, and it's also a premium, right? Yes. So it's very unique when you have the opportunity to carve out your own space in your own home and feel comfortable in doing that. Because I can only imagine with little ones at the house whom you love so much, and they love you so much. How have you, and especially experiencing maternity leave, right?
Yeah.
I remember the last project I was working on before lockdown was recreating a mother's room.
Yeah.
And I was working directly with moms on that. And they were like, and then once we had lockdown, they were like, actually, I've got the best mother's room of all.
Yes,
so it works.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been better. For some moms, it was very helpful, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about just the adjustments you had to make and working from home, and actually just trying to define your home as your workspace?
I mean, we left our favorite place in the world, New York. We had one of our babies while still living in New York. We had, a 2-bed, 1-bath apartment in Park Slope. We were like, oh, we're good. We have 2 bedrooms. And we were not good. The next bedroom was like a closet, as you all know. And so we ended up actually moving to Chicago about in August of last year. And I mean, you can't see behind me right now, but my sick daughter's been home all week. She's a toddler in the hardest possible age. There's an elephant sleeping bag right behind me because she's been laying here all day. It is very difficult. And, I do have the quote unquote luxury of having childcare, being able to send my daughter to daycare. But when those options fall through, all of a sudden your life just collapses in on itself. And really, when you have children, no room in your house is actually your own. No door stays closed, no space stays quiet. So it's been extremely challenging. And, having left New York, where most of my team is, our Chicago office is also tiny. So I'm also not getting that sort of team dynamic, being in meetings with my colleagues, energy that I've been used to my entire career. So it's been a really interesting adjustment and experience, and, loneliness, if I'm honest.
Yeah, we talked about this briefly. You said there was a little bit of guilt, right? Like a big challenge for you, especially in adjusting and returning, that was affecting your well-being, was just like the guilt of taking that time. You know what I mean? And I think all parents can relate to that, right? This idea that like parenthood is a job in and of itself, right? Not everybody understands that scope of work as intimately as the scope of work you all share at work. So can you talk about that a little bit? Just open up about the guilt. I think a lot of parents empathize with that. And in the chat, let me know if you felt the same, right? If you've taken paternity and maternity leave, parent leave, hold some space for Ambika, because I definitely don't think you're alone in that.
No, I don't think anyone's alone. And it's so interesting because I don't think my guilt comes from taking that time. I took that time and felt amazing about it. I extended my leave while on leave. What I'm actually feeling really guilty about is coming back to work, again, my first week, and not being able to apply my energy and intellect and emotions to my work because so much is being required of me at home. And last night was particularly challenging because now I'm sick too. And, I had this feeling of, am I ever going to be able to do this? Like, is this ever going to feel okay? Am I ever going to feel like I can be good at work and good at home? And, you know, with a toddler and a 4-month-old, I genuinely don't know. And I'm sure a lot of parents out there are like, you can do it, you get through it. These are the hardest years. But these really are hard years. And so I think holding space for each other and, you know, people who do have access to a network or a megaphone through media and advertising, you know, it is our responsibility to kind of give everyone a peek behind the curtain on what this experience is actually like, because you truly don't know until you're in it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the last thing I'll ask you, that, and Tasha, I know you have some thoughts about this as well, but what are some adjustments you've made in your work style, or adjustments and accommodations people have made for you that have kind of made this transition feel better?
Yeah. I feel like we are all constantly adjusting for one another at this moment in time, whether people are parents or not. You know, people lost loved ones to COVID, people moved home to help with childcare with their brothers and sisters. And I think there's been a deep reconciliation of everybody's humanity in this moment. You know, just previously we saw Nicola's little daughter there. That is all of our lives right now. We see each other's dogs and pets and parents sometimes and children.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's part of where my guilt comes from, is I feel like people are always having to accommodate for my schedule, whether it's because I have 15 meetings in a row and can't make the time for anything else, or, you know, my kids are homesick. But I also am kind enough to myself to realize that I make accommodations for people all the time too. And that is just how we need to work, because work is about understanding and caring for each other as people just as much as professionals. And I almost think that motherhood has taught me how to mother at work as well, and really changed my dynamic with my teams and how I think about everyone as people.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it definitely extends. Tasha, you were kind of mentioning some of the things you all have implemented that have created blocks for people that maybe have different schedules. Can you talk about some of the ways you all have kind of shifted your work styles?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and being a parent is also a blessing, and some days it doesn't feel like that, but there's people that are also on the other side taking care of parents and doing other things. So just know that I think that great equalizer was this pandemic, and everybody's dealing. So I think we all are giving each other grace. But for us, one of the things that we did specifically in New York is the leaders have been asking that on the teams that we accommodate for commuting time. So in some of our other offices, people, you know, drive to work, they have a parking lot, like their commute is, you know, when they decide to kind of make that happen. In New York, people are on buses and trains and, you know, sometimes on the ferries, right? So we're asking that meetings don't happen between 8 and 10 in the morning or 4 and 6 in the evenings, just to accommodate for the days that people are in the office, that they can commute, right? And we know, because of the trust that has been built over these past 2.5 years, that people go home and log in. Even when they're not required to, they still go home and log in, which is also been pretty interesting to see how many people will have dinner and pause to, you know, do some other things around the house and then get back on at 8:30 at night and then working for a few more hours before they go to bed, right? So people have already been able to flex themselves. So accommodating commute has been something that we've been asking people to acknowledge and to support, so that people feel like they can make that time to do get in the office in a good way, set themselves up so that they can be present with their team.
Yeah, I love that you have that, because especially because the commute, that was actually one of the biggest adjustments I had to make in my morning routine.
Yeah.
Was that I can't just get up and get to work.
Right.
Even if I don't get up until like 8:55. I still need that like buffer of time mentally to get into the groove, right? And it was hilarious because everybody, you know, when they first started to have to work from home, they were like, "Oh, I don't need to get cleaned up in the morning. I can wear my PJs." And it's like, wait, why am I not functioning the Same.
Right.
Yes.
So
Right.
regardless, that buffer needs to be there so that
Mm-hmm.
people can feel, they can still have their time, right? I think
Right.
even as we accommodate for people who have to commute, it's also people who are at home. Just because I'm at home does not mean I'm prepared to jump online right now, right?
Right.
So
Right.
those time blocks still are there. And I also want to uplift something Keely was mentioning, particularly as it comes to the disabled community or people who just have different accommodations that they need to be more accessible. One of the things she said that stuck out to me was like, there were people who had to work from home, right? Their
Right.
disability was what it was before everybody else had to have these accommodations. And the beautiful thing in all of this, she mentioned, is that now it expedited so much of the technological gaps
Yeah.
the
Mhm,
disabled
mhm.
community had, right?
Very
It
true.
expedited so many of the accommodations just like virtually. It streamlined a lot of connectivity issues people were already experiencing, right? And so
Right.
I think it's important for us as we start to think about different groups, different populations, and their needs. There were
Mhm.
folks who had these needs before everybody else did. And now the question is, how can we take that into the future of our workspace, right? So just because some of us are still hybrid and at home, the other thing I'll uplift that Kaylee mentioned was like, just because you might have a disability does not mean you want to work from home. People
Right.
with disabilities still want to come into the office. So the reason I bring that up is the next thing I wanted to talk to you all about is really about what is ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is your ideal setting in the office? What do you feel the offices or just a communal workspace needs to keep in mind to make people feel the most comfortable, right? And if there are things people are already doing, phenomenal, let's talk about them. Or if there's like a wish list right now, let's take advantage of the space and kind of manifest that. So what are some things you think people need to keep in mind in that ideal work environment?
I think one of the things that I see all the time is making sure that there's space so people can collaborate. So we've done a great job in like taking some desks out and making like communal spaces where people can gather, right? But then there's also a lot of times where people are like, I have to have this meeting and I need a quiet space and I need to be able to do that without, walking around for 10 minutes to look for a room. And so we're working through the best way to do that and how to accommodate that. And some of us have been in the building for a bit, so we kind of know where the hiding places are to go if you need to be quiet or have a confidential conversation. But I think one of the other things that's been helpful is, people sharing again at work. So what I like to see is you go into like our cafe space and people are like having lunch together and like making plans like, oh, let's do this together, or are you free right now, like let's go grab a cup of coffee, right? And all that is happening because they're still working,
Mhm.
right? So the fluidity again of those things that people remembered or that are coming back, I think people also appreciate the company or the agency making more spaces for that, right? And allowing people to kind of flow in with each other when they need to, or having space to kind of like, I need to go be quiet and do this thing by myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing that's happened, and my husband's in real estate, so we talk about these sort of things all the time, is office spaces are becoming more like co-working spaces where, all of a sudden the amount of people who are coming into an office has gone down to 20% of your staff. You still have to pay that rent every month, and so you bring in other partners, other companies to come share the workspace. But to Tasha's point, what that creates then is a lack of space, right? A lack of not just physical space, but like, where do I go after 3 years of being in relative isolation? If I'm feeling anxious,
Right.
if I need to have a good cry, all of a sudden, yes, there isn't space to take calls, but there also isn't space to like experience the emotions that I think many of us have felt in a really heightened way over the last few years. And so to me, I love this setup. Like I am thriving, and I think so many people are, in being able to work from home, but have a place to go when home is not conducive to work. One of the things I was thinking about when we were originally talking through the discussion guide and, you know, how we wanted to broach this topic was going back to work with my postpartum body where like nothing fits me, and how I've never gone back to work after having a baby.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, my first day back in the office was last Thursday, and I can't tell you how overwhelmed I was. Like, all of a sudden I have 2 kids. I've never gone into an office before. Like, I need to drop my daughter off. I need to make sure the baby's okay. I need to dress this body that is very foreign to me. And, you know, these are things that we just don't think about. I didn't even think about until I was in that moment. So going into an office at this point is really loaded for a lot of people who, you know, have body dysmorphia, people who are, you know, not confident in how they project themselves and how they carry themselves anymore, people who've gone through immense change and just haven't been around people and developed social anxiety. Like, there's so much behind the scenes emotional labor we have all been trudging through over the last few years. And I think, you know, on one hand, being able to work from home is so beautiful because we can have the space and time to process, but also being able to get out of your house, get out of your head, get out of the context of, you know, that you've potentially been wallowing in, is such a great escape. So to me, you know, there's something really magical about where we've gotten to as a workforce.
Yeah. And being able to go to work and be able to have another parent or someone that you could even share that with. So if you felt like saying like, you know what, this was hard for me today, this was weird, and I don't know how I'm managing through this, and being able to share that with someone else is also, I think, been helpful in building community too, and people kind of connecting and saying like, this was rough today, or like, I couldn't wait to get here today. Like, I was so ready to be, you know, not at home or not dealing with things that, you know, I can deal with later on. I think one of the things that's been interesting for a lot of us too is how much noise you have to contend with, which I'm like, before I wasn't ever really thought about noise in the office. Now I'm like, how did it get so noisy? And where do I, like, all of a sudden, and it'll be like 4 people talking, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But then it's like, other days I'm thriving on like all the noise, right? Like,
you're like, when did they start playing music nonstop in the office?
My sensory cues are going crazy. Like, that to me is the funny thing. I go into work to be social. Okay, if you want me to work, I'll stay at home. I go into work to kiki. I go into work to take 3 walks with individual peoples. I go into work to respectfully talk shit. And to be honest, that's like a core part of the company culture is like half of the reason, and this is no survey besides my own peer group, but like majority of the reason everybody stays, if you ask one person, oh, what's the reason you stay in advertising? What's the reason you stay at your agency? The people.
The people.
That's
it's always
it.
The people.
That's it. That's all. Brands, you know, the grass is always the same everywhere you go, like, and you know what I mean? And the only thing that really shifts is the people that you work with. And I will say that, like, you know, there are these, what I'm hearing, right, is a sense of self-awareness on the mental toll that we've all been under, right? I think the ability, and this is something I need to talk to my young folks about, the ability to self-diagnose in today's culture, okay? We have the language to say, I have body dysmorphia right now. I have social anxiety right now. I'm feeling tense, right? And I think, you know, that's one of the beautiful things I think that we've all been able to reckon with is like, okay, I can name what I'm feeling, right? As opposed to just having to go through the grind 9 to 5, we can now name it. But I think the one thing we've struggled with naming, and we can talk about this now, especially as we highlight the well-being portion of this conversation, is that mental health is so often not named as an accommodating sort of condition that we need to be talking about, right?
Right.
Especially, it's just left out of the conversation. Sometimes, it's not even, Keely even mentioned to us while we were talking, she's like, it's not even classified as a disability sometimes in some
Right.
people's minds. And therefore they're not even aware of the appropriate accommodation. So the last thing I want us to talk about before we open it up to Q&A, and I'm excited to hear some of the questions y'all have in the chat, is how have you been able to work through it? And Ambika, you kind of talked about the talk track and you have your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
How have you been able to work that out either with a partner or a coworker, or what are some of the tools that you've been able to just use to help work through and kind of release that? And then Tasha, I'll say the same for you.
Mm-hmm.
What are maybe some of, especially from a DEI standpoint, what are some of the accommodations for mental health and wellness that people should be considering, right? And asking for if needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think invisible disabilities, if you will, or invisible issues that are not easy to articulate have been shrouded for centuries, right? People have tried to diagnose from the outside because people can't express it from the inside. It's not openly discussed, and it's never been normalized. And so for me, one of the things I promised myself pretty young, honestly, was that I did not realize how much shit I was going to go through in my career and in my life, right? Like marriage. Why don't people talk about how fucking hard that is? Having babies, getting a job, climbing up in an industry, managing a team, dealing with sexual harassment, dealing with racism, dealing with sexism. There is so much that we go through. And I promised myself, because I felt like I was navigating my entire life blind, like truly oldest sibling in an immigrant family status. Like I was like, where am I? Who am I? What is happening? And so, I really have made a concerted effort in the last several years to just be really open. And even if I don't have the perfect words, I put whatever words I can come up with out there. And then other people give me words too, and all of a sudden I feel like for the first time in my life, I do have the words. I never knew I had body dysmorphia until the last few years, where people were like, do you really see yourself that way? And I'm like, yes. And sometimes it's crippling. Like, I don't want to go to that pool party. I don't want to be anywhere hot right now. I want to wear my sweatshirts and sweatpants. So, these are words that if we start sharing our own experiences, people will reflect back on us, things that we never knew about ourselves, things that we never were able to articulate. And so for me, it's really come from, at first, forcing myself to be open, and now using that dialogue almost as an outlet and as a release. And it's been really, really powerful and so helpful to me.
Yeah. And that's the part, right? Like you've made that decision to be open and to share and be vulnerable, and you're getting that back. And I think that's a lot of the work that happens in DEI is about that, right? Letting people have their experiences, share their experience, educate other people about it, and then being the catalyst to make sure that everybody is getting equal treatment about it, feeling heard and seen. One of the things that we did, we launched a wellness ERG. And that has been a big catalyst to helping support education around it. But I also just want to remind people that mental health is actually covered under the Disability Act, right? So it's a covered physical, mental health, that is all connected, and that is a protected category, right? Legally. What I think people struggle with is whether or not they feel comfortable to share that. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing your specific challenge or something that you don't want anyone to know about, and it's a disability, you don't have to legally share that. The nuance in that, though, is if you asked your organization for an accommodation, then you'll probably have to provide paperwork from a physician or a therapist. If you ask for an accommodation to say, I need a shorter work day, or, I need to make some kind of adjustment in my role because of my mental or physical health, right? But you don't have to disclose that. But I think when people do, the freedom in that is also getting the community to rally around them. And then, of course, when people bring it to us, we make sure that we, ask, is it okay for you to share? Can we talk about it? Can we have more education? And it's helped a lot of leaders also be able to be more vulnerable and share out and
Yeah.
be better leaders because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I will say that the one personal anecdote I can offer is going to therapy is so, I don't care if it's friend therapy, I don't care if it's actual therapy with a therapist, but being able to name not only what you're experiencing and defining what you need is the most beneficial in that process, right? And that's how you're going to be able to work through it. So we have two questions. The first is, what would you say to companies or leaders who are requiring that teams return to the office?
Well, it depends, right? It depends on, because that's nuanced. Return to office, how? Because I think a lot of agencies especially have been very accommodating in saying, we're not requiring you to be here at the specific time or the specific instance, but you need to work with your team, or if you have a client event or a client meeting, or you work it out with your teams, and have been flexible in saying, we want this to work best for everyone. I don't know. I think it's more of nuanced in how people are being asked to come back to work, right? Versus coming back to work. Because I think we all kind of have made the decision that eventually there's going to be some form of coming back to work. Now, for people who are remote, that also looks different. So again, it's a little bit nuanced in how you're being asked to come back to work. If it's a few days a week, but you still have a flexible schedule, then your company is probably leaving it up to you, your manager, your leaders, to make decisions based on what works best for the team.
Yeah.
I think if a company is requiring, like if there is a sense of a mandate associated with returning to the office, in my opinion, they are precluding themselves from having a truly diverse workforce. Because not everyone wants to come back to an office. Not everyone feels comfortable. Not everyone wants to face the microaggressions that they faced being in the office. Not everybody, feels that that's necessary in the scope of their life. And so I have a big problem with companies who require people to return to work full time. I think there is a beautiful middle ground, as I was saying earlier, where, if you come in a few days a week, great. Come in once a week, do your coffees, do your hangouts. We think of it very similarly, Pilar, where we're saying, this is your social day. Truly, like we've openly said it to the org. We're like, this is your social day. Hang out, have a few drinks, go on multiple walks. Like that's what this day is for. And I think framing it that way is helpful. It takes some of the anxiety out of it. It takes some of the pressure out of it.
Yeah.
But if there's no flexibility, we will not have diversity.
Yeah, which is why I said, how are they being asked to come back, right? And I think the other part too, as an industry, the business model hasn't changed, right? So hybrid work has changed, but our the way we're modeled as specifically agencies and how we're billing and billable time and timesheets,
right,
that hasn't adjusted. So I think there has to be a deeper conversation in how that is going to be working moving forward also, to accommodate making more flexibility and accommodating different workspaces now.
Great.
Another question. So one thing I will say is we get free lunch when we come in.
Good for you.
I'm there on time. I'll just say that. I really love this question because we left off on this conversation. So the question is, how do we advocate for ourselves as people with invisible disabilities or neurodivergent without exposing ourselves to judgment? So about the capabilities that you have, right? So let's say you are a person that is neurodivergent, you do have a disability of some sort, but you don't want to be judged by that, right? But you do want to tell people what's really good.
Right.
Do you have any quick tips, tricks for somebody that's experiencing that?
So I think one of the ways I give advice is tell people how you best work, right? Like, hey, when I do my best when I don't have, a lot of bright lights over me, or I work best when I'm able to kind of, be on a call, but then sit, a little to the side so I can hear the content and information and so I can absorb. Like, tell people how you best work. If you don't want to divulge, I have issues, hearing, or I have issues with certain lighting, or, I get a bit of anxiety if I'm in a space and it's a small conference room with other people. If you show up and say, like, this is how you can get the best work out of me, or the best way I'm going to show up for the team or for the client, then people lean into that without kind of like wanting to know or being nosy about, like, well, why, what's wrong with you? It's kind of like, oh, okay, you like it when it's, lighting is dimmer, or you like it when you can like have speakers and be in a room to hear things. That's kind of how I've given the advice on how to help with that.
Yeah.
I would say this is a very loving probe on your question, which is it because you know you will feel judged, or is it because you have a fear of judgment?
True.
I think if you because I live in fear of judgment all the time, whether people are judging me or not. It is something ingrained in me that, yes, therapy, has been helping kind of chip away at, but I live in fear of judgment. If I put myself out there, what will people say? What will they think about me? Will it diminish, whatever I have built for myself, et cetera, et cetera. But what I have learned is half the time that's my own fear. It's not that anyone is actually going to think any which way about me. So that's just one probe to your question.
I love that.
If you do feel like you will be judged broadly in your organization, I would say, who are your allies in the org? It doesn't have to be someone senior. It doesn't need to be the CEO of your company or the head of HR, but like, who are your people? And how can you start to seed this with them so that they can help protect you?
Yes.
90% of the time, I'm just texting my people on the side being like, hey, I need you to handle this meeting. I can't. My kid is sick and I'm having a meltdown. They're like, got it, done.
And that's allyship.
Yes.
In action. Allyship in action.
Yes, that is allyship in action.
If you buddy up with somebody and say, hey, I've kind of noticed this thing. And when meetings are run this way, we don't seem to walk away with what we need out of it. So what if we approach it this way? How would you, and I do think the other thing that should be named is, I didn't feel comfortable being able to express solutions like that until I became a director, right?
Okay.
You cannot avoid the weight that a title has in the room.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I've always been a leader, but it wasn't until I had the title that people were like, let's mobilize around, right? So I will name that, especially for more junior folks that might be in the room, the allyship piece of it is important, because now what you're saying is, especially because juniors are majority of the people responsible for the work, the weight falls on juniors, right? I'm going to be more efficient at getting this done if XYZ TUV.
Yes.
Right? And I'm looking to this person who's supporting me in this. I have you're co-signed when you enter the conversation, so that way everybody knows it's actually not a me thing. It's an us thing.
It's an us thing,
point, right? Yeah. The last question, we're about to run out of time. I'm going to combine these two questions because two people asked similar questions, but they're essentially looking for solutions in making sure everybody is heard in a virtual and in-person environment, right? So let's put the context of, you're conducting a meeting. There are people that are virtual. There are people that are in person. How can we make sure, what are some tips and tricks you all have implemented into your working style that accommodates for equal weighting of the voices in the room?
Right.
Ooh, I always have a body in the room who has my questions in advance of a meeting, because that is hugely challenging. Also, as someone who talks a lot in meetings and has like so much shit to say all the time, I make sure somebody has my thoughts, and I'm constantly slacking to make sure that my voice is heard, even if I can't unmute myself fast enough.
Right. That's a good one. So a couple things. I I've seen some teams have the person virtually lead the call. So then they always have to be connected to the people in the room, because you have to kind of go back to them to go to the next thing or the next part of the meeting. The other thing for us early on in the pandemic, we said that Mondays and Mondays and Fridays were our virtual days, right? Even whatever work was happening in between the week, but Mondays and Fridays were the virtual days that we had events like cultural activities or cultural celebrations. So that helped, because then everybody was virtually together on one day, right? So, and we've carried that over now into the hybrid work. So virtual meetings can happen on those days and everybody is on the one space. If everybody can be in the room together in an office, then they try to accommodate that. So it's not going to be a one size fit all, right? But I think also for people who have these hybrid meetings, having someone in a room to say like, hey, remember, I'm here, and have them always refer to that person, or like, again, an ally to say like, don't forget so-and-so, what do you think, to make sure that everybody stays connected.
It seems like that just quick reach out of the organizer of the meeting. Hey, I know you're going to be virtual for this meeting. Is there anything you want me to make sure is brought up? Right. Yep. This is where, especially as a strategist, me and my account team, right here. Okay. Because it's so important to have that even 5 minutes to connect beforehand, or 5 minutes to debrief after. Hey, I wanted to make sure this gets heard. Right. So the last question, I think it's incredibly important. Also, shout out to the person for asking this question. How can women of color that work in DEI or worked in DEI rebuild a digital identity after publicly sharing experiences of discrimination? Right. Ooh. So I'm going to say it one more time. How can women of color that worked in DEI rebuild a digital identity after being public with sharing experiences of discrimination? And I first want to name the fact that you shared it in the first place. I'm going to follow you. Yeah, so right. Just know that. Right. Just know
that. I mean, send out your whatever handle you have. I'm like, Twitter handle, no. And we will all support you. I think, you know, if you remember the Me Too movement in advertising maybe I'm aging myself, but it was a while ago. It wasn't perfect. It was not perfectly done, but the entire premise of it was to ensure women who came forward were not shunned from the industry because they spoke their truth.
Right.
That philosophy is so incredibly important. And I think every single person in this space right now, speakers, listeners, contributors, creators, will want to support you for coming out and being public about it. There are always going to be trolls. There are always going to be haters. People are going to comment horrible shit on your posts once you reintroduce yourself into the digital world. But I think the wind beneath your wings and all of the people who will come up to support you will make it worth it. So hit us up. Like if we need to create a following for you, hit us up. We will do it.
Again, allyship. I think other people will want to support that, will want to say, you know what, this person has a voice, needs to be with us, has things that they can do to help push us forward, move us forward. And we all want to rally around that and help bring more of that to light. And part of it too is, again, like you said before, and a lot of that is probably what you're thinking. We haven't had the opportunity to see you back in the digital space. So, you know, to make the assumption that we won't want to be with you, support you, no, let's do it. And I think you'll know that people are genuinely going to want to be a part of the work you're doing and have your presence to help them. I think it's an exchange, right? You come back so that we can get access.
Yeah.
Right. For sure.
I would also say, and especially as a strategist, right? Your story is important, but trauma doesn't have to be the central narrative.
Sure.
Right? So what is the way you want to, and how do you want to round out your story? And that's a creative, fun and liberating exercise. I don't care if you want to learn how to make baklava. I don't care if you want to learn how to crochet. I don't care if you want an Etsy page the next day. We didn't know you for that. Like, who, you know what I mean? The way that people say yesterday's price is not today's price. Yesterday's person is not today's person. Right? Okay?
I'm going to use that. Yep.
Because baby, if you hold me to who I was, then I don't have any room to grow. No one has any room to change, and we don't have any room to evolve. So what I would encourage you to do is take what could be a very traumatic and almost vulnerable space for you, and think about a fun, positive way to think about it is, who do I want to be known for, and what do I want to get excited about again? And I've said this before, but inner child work is a great way to do that, right? Go back to the crafts and activities you used to do as a kid, and suddenly it'll feel so organic and natural, and suddenly you'll just open up. And sharing those comes from an incredibly authentic space, because that's what you've always loved. So it's easier to share, but then it gives you more to open up about, and don't feel beholden to like just being an industry person online. Once you start to open up about who you are as a person, people then have other points of empathy to connect with you about. So then you're known for so many other things. Like when I did my creative sabbatical and I quit my job, I started to do pottery, and then everybody was talking to me about that. They didn't care where I was going next. They didn't care about my next career move. They didn't care about anything. They cared about, oh, that's really cool. Like, you're actually, this is working for you, right? So I'll just name that. And then the last thing I'll name, because this has been such a phenomenal conversation. I'm so grateful for the time that you all have shared with us, and just Ambika and Tasha, you've been incredible. Welcome to Advertising. The project that I started this conversation with is an anonymous platform dedicated to sharing the stories of people of color and advertising and the racial trauma that they faced. These are firsthand accounts, right? And we've partnered with a person who has a PhD in diversity, equity, and inclusion to analyze and unpack the implications of this experience and how it's all connected to a systemic issue that we experience in this world. So we've created a platform and a space that's anonymous, that's not fishbowl. Child,
not that fishbowl.
Not that. It is education-based. For people to go to and talk about their stories, and also feel justified in their experiences, because too often when you share them, you're gaslit, right? Yeah. So don't feel afraid to open up. There are platforms and spaces to open up. We've created one under Allyship in Action. And the last thing I'll leave you with is Ambika and Tasha, thank you. And make sure to follow us all on LinkedIn and Twitter while it's there, and Instagram.
Thank you so much. Thanks
so much.
Yeah.